Welcome back, everybody. Fall is definitely in the air. It's a good thing I got the transmission inside. Right now I'm sitting here next to it. I'm going to call this room the assembly room. And if we have some visitors that want to come and look, we'll talk back and forth and maybe have a discussion. Plus, not only are we going to assemble with other people, we're going to assemble the tractor over the winter. So, wanted to fill you in a little bit about my knowledge of the old D John Deeres. I've talked to a lot of fellows about them, tried to gather as much information as I could about them, the differences in the parts, the differences in the years. Every model year had different things going on, and it's very hard to keep up with all the changes that Deere did through the years. It's they had more updates than my iPhone does. So we're gonna talk through some of those things, discuss differences in parts. It's gonna be educational for me and everybody else as we work through this, because there's some parts that I think I'm gonna probably use, and when I get to assembling, they probably won't fit. And so there'll be some of that going on, and I'll have to change gears and literally go a different route in some situations. I'm sure there's going to be some roadblocks and stumbles along the way, but as you follow this video sessions, we'll all work through it together and see if we can put a tractor together. I'm not claiming to be a know-it-all. I'm just trying to relay back to the viewers what I've learned over the years, what I've gathered from other people and from studying the parts catalogs. And I'm going to try to do the best I can in describing the differences as the years go along. You know what Ronald Reagan said about know-it-alls. The problem with know-it-alls is they know things that just aren't true. So we're not claiming to know everything about it. I'm learning as I go also. So right now I'm sitting in the assembly room. I've got my bench set up behind me and my tools. And I want to start out by talking about my parts list that I need yet. And I'm asking the viewers to help me out in maybe finding some of those or most of those parts. There's probably half the list that I doubt I'll ever find. And most of those parts I've already got plan Bs for, and they're sitting on the rack already painted. And they're going to be good used parts that I've gathered over the years. But you never know what you find out there, so I'm open to any and all help on finding parts. For instance, I never thought they would exist, but I've had secondhand knowledge that maybe there's a fellow out there that has new old stock cast covers for the top of the transmission and the crankcase. So I haven't seen them. I've made an effort to try to get in contact with the fellow and see if I could acquire them, but so far I have had no success on that. But anyway, you never know what you'll find out there. So I'm listing most everything that I'm short, other than the transmission housing, the wheels, the front axle, and of course the tin work. I'm going to have all new tin work, and I'll paint that up, and that'll be the final touch next spring. Hopefully we'll have it together by then and running. So with that, I'm going to start showing you my parts list and running down through those a little bit and showing what parts I really need badly. Here's the list of parts that I'm short. There's about 30 different parts that I'd like to find. I'm hoping to get maybe 15 out of the 30 found. As I go down the list, I wrote them as importance to my project. So at the top, there is that D133R large ring gear that goes on the differential. I've got all the rest of the differential, the spider gears, the carrier, the high-speed gear, but I need the large ring gear for the low speed. and that's a D133R with 78 teeth. And if by chance somebody had the bolts to bolt those all together onto the carrier, that's a bolt set AD690. And each bolt is a D1596R. And then the next part I badly need is the large chain sprocket that bolts onto the axle. And that's a D74R. The clutch pressure plate, the D66R, would be nice to find. It's not imperative. That could be one of the last parts that go on. So I could do a lot of building before I could find that. The crankshaft, I'm in a quandary whether I'm going to rebuild a crankshaft or try to find a new one. I'll talk about that a little bit later in the video when I talk about the flywheel with the pile of parts that I'm going to show you. And then I need 3 new push rods. They're the D214R. I got 1 new one, and they are the short ones. I think they changed those when they went to the newer styled engine in 1931, I think is when they changed those push rods to a longer one. The shift lever would be nice to find. The clutch rod would be nice to find, and the throttle rods. The one throttle rod that is ahead of the governor housing, that would be nice to find. I thought I had some of those, and it turned out that on the later tractors they look identical, but the little slot for the arm that bolts onto it is on the opposite side of the shaft. So I learned I needed to find that. And then the spark advance rod and the throttle and spark levers, the clutch handle quadrant. The clutch handle quadrant I think would be fairly easy to find new. That's a D266R. And I thought I had one of those also, but I can't put my fingers on it. I found the one for the later D, the next version, but I couldn't find the early one. And it'd be nice to have a short clutch handle with new holes in it that are wallered out. Let's talk about the oil gauge here in a bit. Flywheel bolts, I've got a couple versions of flywheel bolts, but not the one for the spoke flywheel. There's a little screw that adjusts the shifting rail back and forth so you can line up your gears. That's a D678R. I don't have that new. That's looks like a pipe bushing, but the threads on it are a lot coarser. And then moving to the air cleaner, the intake pipe, and the air stack going up with the little mushroom top to it. I don't have new or new old stock. I have new ones, but I don't have new old stock ones. And then the hitch would be nice to find. I've got a new drawbar, a new old stock drawbar, but it'd be nice to find the hitch and the hitch cross member that the front of the drawbar bolts to. And then from here on, I really doubt if I'll find any of these parts like the seat spring and leaf, helper leaf, the AD341R, the 2 shafts on the steering, the top and lower one, the tie rod, that would be the smaller tie rod for the early tractors, the D219R. The radius rods, I doubt if I'll find those, but somebody might have them. It'd be nice to find the front gas tank bracket, the D253R. I have the rear one. The gas tank, I know there's gas tanks out there that are new old stock, and that'd be awesome if I could find one of those. The radiator castings, like I talked about before when I was painting the radiator and finding parts for the radiator, the casting parts on that, the D53R and 54 and 55R, I haven't ever seen any of those, and I haven't talked to anybody that's ever seen any. So moving over here to the bench, of course, there's my book. That's my later book that is more inclusive than the early book. I have the early book in the house right now. But there's the magneto that I overhauled a year ago in hopes of getting this project going. And I wrote on the tag, everything's new in except the spark advance lever and housing and the side panels and the rotor and bearings I had to get used. But other than that, a lot of new parts in that magneto. And then I have a new old stock complete DLT 304 carburetor that I found somewhere along the road. I can't remember where I picked that up, but I believe the butterfly lever was gone on it, so I had to put a new butterfly lever and a new drain on it. And I put a new float in it, updated float. Took out the cork float, it was deteriorated anyway. But other than that, the rest of that's new old stock. And then this oil pressure gauge. This is a D15R, and I have the spring, and the piston is for a later one, but it'd be nice to find the correct piston and rod. The piston would probably be pretty much the same. The rod has a little cap on it, and then there's a screw-on cap that goes in the top of the housing in there. So that's different from the later Ds. Up until past 25, I believe they went to a one-piece here that only the rod stuck up in there and there was no cap on the top. So it'd be nice to find that cap that screws in on the top and the rod and the piston. And those are numbers D642, 644, and 646R for those three parts that go in that. And also down below the bench, I've gone through my gaskets and finding all the gaskets that I have. I probably don't have all of them, but I've got quite a few of them. This, of course, is the first reduction cover gasket. And then I've got some old gasket sets in different condition. This one's pretty bad shape. This one has a pretty nice tag on it. It's just a little dusty and discolored. And then there's some other gaskets here that are a little newer, but still from John Deere. I think I've got probably 95% of the gaskets I need. So from there, I'll go to where I have the other parts laid out on the floor, and we'll go through those and discuss those. This is where I've been going through some of the hardware and washers. And there's some new old stock fuel lines and oil lines. There's a lot of smalls that I probably don't have. I probably need more smalls than Danny DeVito's wardrobe. And here we're getting to the pile of parts that I have from here, from the flywheel, back to the wheels that are painted. Those wheels aren't going to be the ones I'm using there for other projects. Actually, the wheels that I was going to use, that I'm planning on using, are the ones in the back here. I found a pretty nice set of rears and 200 fronts, couple wallered out holes. But here's kind of what that high gear resembles on the differential. This is the high speed gear, the 74 tooth one. I believe that's a D121R, but it resembles that quite a bit. It's only 4 teeth bigger, and that's a D133R is the one I'm looking for. And then the chain sprocket, I need another one of those badly. That bolts onto the axle, and that's a 38 tooth sprocket, and that's a D74R. The replacement ones had the paddles on right here. They were put on later to bring the oil up around to oil the chain better and the bearings. And here's the two axles that I went to Kansas and purchased a week ago. That's one piece that I can scratch off the list. And then these bearings. These bearings I got probably 10 years ago in preparation for this project. But they're the early bearings, the 5755 bearing. and the 5720 race. And I got enough of those to do my project. They're very hard to come by, and if you do find them, they're probably pretty expensive. The two high-speed and low-speed gears bolt on each side of the differential right here through these holes, and that's where the bolt package goes. I believe it's the AD670 bolt package. There's 12 of them, and there's the rest of the differential there, the beveled gears, and the new shaft to go through. That other bevel gear is not riveted together yet. That's going to be a project. And there's the new old stock bearings that go on the differential. As we go around here, there's a lot of little parts also that I'm not going to talk about right now exactly, but here's a governor case. It's a new old stock governor case. It looks identical, but it does have the 3 rivets on the top. So that wouldn't be correct for that vintage tractor, but being new old stock, and that's the only difference, I decided to use it. And then I also went ahead and put in a new set of helical gears for the fan shaft. But all that in there I rebuilt a year ago in preparation, and everything in there is new old stock. And then a neat piece is the 2-bolt water pipe that's new. I bought that on eBay, I believe, probably 20 years ago. I think that's a 681R. That was quite a find. You never know what you'll find out there in the wild. And then the rocker box, I rebuilt all that with new shafts, springs, lifters, or rocker arms, I mean. And then there's a new head underneath there. Everything here is new old stock, except for the crankshaft. The reason I got the crankshaft here is I wanted to see how it fit with the flywheel. It was a pretty good crankshaft. I was contemplating whether to use it on this project. But it turns out that the hub in the flywheel is about 70 thousandths oversized. I can't tell that it was ever run on a tractor. The paint looks like it's old, and there haven't been any bolts in the holes. It looks old, but I'm just not sure what happened. Whether they machined it wrong, and that's the reason it survived. Nobody had ever used it. I'm going to have to figure out whether to build up the crank or make a sleeve or something, or go to a different flywheel. I'm not sure. Here's another neat item, is a D492R air cleaner, and that assembly number must be an AD110. There's a new crank gear, and I have this new second version PTO assembly. It's got the bolts wired in and the caps wired in. The guy I bought it from had it sitting outside, which is too bad, but otherwise the paint would have been a lot better on it. But it will fit on, I believe, a 25D. I've seen them on 25Ds. I saw one at Albert City's show last summer that was on a 25D. You just have to put on the right shaft, I believe. So in order to use that, I'm going to have to put in the right shaft. And that gets me to my shaft collection. The spline shafts that the shifting gears slide back and forth on. I've got 4 different versions here. Starting in the back, the 375R shaft, I have 2 of those. And you can tell those because they don't have threads on the end to put a big nut on the outside of the first reduction gear. It just has a hole in the center for a cap screw and washer. And then Deere went to the next version, the D799R, with the threads on the end. You put a cap screw to hold the gear on, and also the keyed in to run the first version PTO. I wish I had one of those early version PTOs, but they're hard to find. So the shaft I'm going to use is this D950R that I had the sliding gears on it and the new nut. And that way I believe it'll fit in this tractor, but it has the spline in on it that'll fit into the second version PTO assembly. And then I have this next shaft. It has a finer spline on it. I believe that's for the D when they put the internal PTO in them. Getting back to the early shafts, they had a flat roller bearing on them, a Hyatt bearing, and I do have a couple of those new, but I'm not going to use them on this project. But this shaft, the D950R, uses a roller bearing, and I got a couple of those. I think that's a 1309 bearing, and the bearing quill. And then getting to the clutch pulley, this is a D833R clutch pulley. It comes after the pulley that the 23s and 24s used that had the drilled hole in the face so they could machine the ears inside the clutch pulley. In starting 25, they did away with drilling through the face, and they must have come up with another method of drilling all those holes in there. So I got that new old stock and a 915 clutch sleeve, and all the springs and pins are in there. This will probably take a video all in itself to assemble this. And then going on to the gears that go on the clutch pulley, I got 3 versions of those. This is the D661R that's wider. It was made for the unhardened gear in the early version. I think there was probably even an earlier version in 23, but it doesn't even show that in the parts book. And then what I'm going to use is the hardened gear, the big hardened gear with the mate of the D967R and 968R big gear. So I'm going to use those pair in my tractor. And then this is the next version. I think in 30 or 31 they changed to another gear. And I'm going to put on I don't have a new old stock clutch driver that doesn't have the clamping bolts, so I'm going to go ahead and do the updated version with the clamping bolts. And there's new old stock facings, the cylinder block that's new, and the pistons that go in it, and the rods and the pins, and a new fan, and fan driving discs, and facing discs. And of course I talked about the new old stock radiator in a previous video. Well, I guess that kind of gives you a sneak peek at what I have and what I need to do this project. And I would appreciate comments and help as far as locating some of these parts I don't have. That would be very helpful. And you can like to follow along the rest of the winter as I rebuild this tractor. Subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you down the road.
Tractor.